950. Real Texas, Real Talk. KPRC Houston, an iHeart radio station.
All right, I think you know this. My wife works in the public schools. She works, I won't say which ISD she's in because that's not fair to them. It also means I can't tell good stories that I get from her if you all know where she works and who she works for and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, she works in the public school system, so she knows what's going on. I hear a few stories from time to time. The names are always changed to protect the innocent. But I do know this. It is not easy. It is not easy to be a public school teacher right now. It is not easy to be an administrator. It's not easy being a student. It's not easy being a parent. Public schools are not an easy place anyway you look at it. Now, here in the greater Houston area, just about all the kids are going back to school this week. Between this week and next week, they'll all be back. And one of the areas that I thought we'd take a couple of minutes to talk about with our guest, Dr. Vince Callahan, is anxiety for your student in particular. I'm sure there are a lot of teachers who are anxious and administrators who are anxious and parents, and maybe parental anxiety is part of the problem. Dr. Callahan, welcome back to AM 950 KPRC. Good to have you on, sir. How big of a problem is anxiety as relates to our students?
Oh, I don't know, 50, 60% or more.
Holy moly.
Maybe 100%. Everybody experiences anxiety at some level. The issue is whether or not they can bounce back and do what I call self-regulating. So if I'm a little 3-year-old or 5-year-old or 7, 8, 10, whatever, 12, middle school especially, I'm worried about, is this outfit going to look good, and am I going to have a good teacher, and are they going to be cool or they're not going to be cool, or who are my friends? And that creates a level of anxiety, but that's not what most of this is talking about. There's a lot of kids who really get upset and anxious, and anxiety is that worry factor. What if happens? What if this happens to me, and what if I can't get out of it, or what if I do something embarrassing, and I just have that loop going and going and going.
Okay, that the way you describe that, though, that almost sounds like a lack of self-confidence.
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right.
Anxiety is connected to lack of self-confidence, and here's the not to be controversial or say here's one cause, but let's just go there for a second. One of the causes of student anxiety is the anxiety of the parents, like you said when you first started.
Well, that's good because I'm thinking the first question I actually was going to ask you is what would a 3, 4, 5, or 6-year-old have to be anxious about? They should know what to even to be anxious about. So they have to be picking that up from their parents, right? Or at least from one of their parents.
Yes. Absolutely. Children mirror the behavior of the adults.
Okay. So if you see an anxious child, you've got an anxious parent. Is anxiety something, clearly we all have it about something. Some of us are very good at hiding it, or we cope with it, whatever that may be. But there are some parents who seem to be anxious about just about everything their child does, and I'm thinking that must be some of the people you're describing as who are just anxious all the time in any kind of environment, especially school.
Right, absolutely, because they're worried about did I get it all done, or maybe they're a perfectionist, or maybe their own sense of self-worth is low, and it drives them to get all the things done and add all the things into the day. They can be an overachiever. They can be an overthinker. They can be an overdoer where they're trying to get everything done. And that makes for interesting childhood family systems.
I'll bet it does. So you say the majority of us obviously have anxiety in some form or another. At what point does it become debilitating?
Is what I called about you can't bounce back. We all have a mechanism inside of us where we can control. Once we experience something, we can bounce back or return back to, it's called homeostasis, which is getting back to normal or that balance. When we're unable to get that balance back ourselves without some kind of external help, now it's debilitating to us.
Okay. It's funny because I don't know about when you were in school, but I was in school. I knew there's no such thing as people describing, learning disabilities or any of the other things that seem to be so common today. I think probably some, at least in the medical profession, would say that we're just better at diagnosing this stuff. This stuff has always been around. We just have a label for it now, where before we didn't. But I also kind of have to wonder, because we have so many. I know from my experience, again, having a wife in the public school system, that more often than not, kids have already been labeled to some extent, and many times they've been labeled by their own parents as having some sort of a learning disability or needing some sort of special concession because they have test anxiety or whatever it may be, as if somehow we all need to have an excuse for not being able to perform at what somebody thinks you should be performing at 100% of the time.
Absolutely. You're not talking about performance trophies, are you, or participation trophies?
Well, I have to wonder if that's part of what's. I have to wonder if that's part of what's led to all this.
Yes, the answer is yes, because we haven't taught children how to set goals and to work for things.
Okay.
We have given out the participation trophies, and we have made sure that everything is, we coddle and make sure that everything's fine. And it's okay if Johnny falls and scrapes his knee. It's not going to kill him. It's okay if he gets a little dirty. It's okay if he feels a little bit of something. We need to work it through. Parents need to. If we're going back to anxiety for a second, the night before school, it would be really helpful to get into some kind of soothing routine where the day winds down. And that doesn't mean to be on a tablet. That means even as a family.
Yeah.
And even like the next morning, when we're going to school, it isn't a time to punish the child for something they've done or didn't do or got up late. It isn't time to do that, because here's what's going on in the brain. If I can go here for a second.
Sure.
When you're under stress, you go into fight, flight, or freeze mode, which means that you dump cortisol, which is the stress hormone. It takes 15 minutes for that cortisol to peak, but it takes 3 hours for it to go away. So if I'm having my first day of school, or I'm getting ready for school, and now the home is stressed out and mom and dad are stressed out and I get yelled at or something happens like that, I'm going to school hyped up on cortisol. My whole day is ruined because I'm going to be irritable that day until my teacher does something to change that in my brain.
Okay. All right. So you're working
it's my
behind
advice,
the ball.
if I can give advice,
Absolutely.
Relax.
Please do.
Relax. Number one, get a routine at night where it kind of brings down the end of the day that's not hyped up or anxious. In the morning before school, relax. It's okay if you got up a few minutes late. It's okay. It's not everything's a big deal. Learn to go to school with better neurotransmitters than stress hormone.
I think
that's a whole other topic.
Yep, yeah, it is. I think that there are a lot of, and I don't want to make this sexist or pin this strictly on moms because it's not all moms, but certainly there's a certain relationship that young children have with mothers, and that first time they go off to school, go off to real school, can be stressful for the mother, which gets transferred, I think, to the child. So in a perfect world, how are you preparing that 5-year-old for their first day of real school, the first day of kindergarten?
I'm going to talk about that experience with them days or even weeks prior to that first time. I'm going to sit down and say, no, on this date, and I'm going to show them on the calendar, and we're going to knock off those days, and as we get closer to it, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to get them involved in packing that backpack and picking out the backpack from the store. I'm going to get them involved in this is what your day is going to look like. I'm going to have some kind of a wonderful end-of-the-day routine the day before school. That morning, we're going to play upbeat, positive music in the house, and we're going to have a great breakfast. You got to send them out the door with food. And we're going to prepare for the day. And then when they come home, I'm going to talk to them about their day, what was good, what was bad, strengths and weaknesses, and I'm going to be involved. Yes, I'm talking about a family unit, not an electric family unit.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So it really is. It's really about you as a parent. You set up the success or the failure of your school child, especially the really young ones, with the attitude you bring to it, and just giving them an idea of what to expect. That has to solve a lot of anxiety problems, especially because I'm thinking for a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, the biggest I know when I went off to kindergarten, I think my biggest issue was just separation anxiety, because I wasn't used to not having my parents around. All of a sudden,
right.
I'm spending all day with somebody I've never met before.
That's right. But guess what? The good news is kids attach to their teachers just like they attach to parents. And if a teacher knows how to create that relationship with that child, the transition is very easy, because it's just like being at home with mom.
Okay. Maybe a quick one more for you here. A quick piece of advice for middle school student parents, because to me that's the most volatile age. It's also a big transition to go from elementary school to middle school before you go off to high school. It's a whole different world for 14 and 15-year-olds, and that could be a little bit of a tough transition.
Yes, it can. So for that age group, I'm going to look for the signs that they're getting angry for no reason. If they are crying, if they have trouble sleeping, if they're doing any kind of temper tantrums, if they're irritable, if they're restless, I'm looking for the warning signs in the middle schoolers. I'm looking for any potential cutting. I'm looking for the levels of anxiety. And again, I'm looking, can they restore back to themselves? And can they, I know middle schoolers don't want to necessarily involve parents, but if you become relatable instead of judgmental, and if you're actually really wanting to know about their life and care about them and portray that message, and that's hard. I know it's tough with middle schoolers because that's just a hard group of folks to work with sometimes. But they're easy once you get to know them, and once you really genuinely go, hey, I want to know about you. Tell me the small things, because in the middle schooler's mind, the small things are huge.
Yes.
And they a lot of times think, oh, they don't want to care about the small things. Make an effort as a parent to really know the small things about your child. And if you can get them to trust you with the small things, they'll give you the big things.
Okay. That's great advice. Dr. Callahan, always good to talk to you, sir. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.